Hey, good afternoon. Just going to give a minute longer just to collect all the people who are hoping to join. So just bear with us just another minute. Thanks very much. Seem to be picking up more as we go along. So just 30 seconds, if that's okay. I know everybody will be keen to crack into their siren beer if it's not already happened, but just the 30 seconds and then we can start. Good. Well, welcome to the Veritas Blue Source Beer Tasting webinar. This is part of a series of webinars we've been running actually over the last few months. If you're interested in any of the topics we've covered, you can see all of those on our knowledge base on our website, the bluesource.co.uk website. Data governance, ransomware, and eDiscovery causing you to lose sleep. Well, we see organizations that we deal with at various stages on a maturity continuum. At one end are the high sleep losers, the people who are kept awake all night. And typically their organizations have come from an environment where they see data as a liability. It's a necessary emission from the corporate exhaust pipe. It grows storage exponentially, and it's unwieldy. It just keeps going. They also have probably a defined data structure and policies that were at least either built for initial regulation or GDPR with data mapping and data flows. But in many cases that they have not been revised since the initial GDPR. And there are no real good tools to actually work out whether policy really is being put into practice. They continue to struggle with case management, whether that's around dealing cases, transactional cases, or even things like SARS requests, and they're chucking more and more resource at it. So they're using bodies to fix the problem rather than technology. And interestingly, they're relying heavily on security products in their defense against ransomware, and haven't really looked at the data structures and the data protection behind those security products. And often they've moved to the cloud through shadow IT, not through design. So access controls, storage and templates have been built behind the scenes rather than in the design phase. At the other end are the good sleepers. They've typically implemented data classification across all of their data stores, and they're also implemented labeling in their Microsoft repositories. They have great tools to check if that data is being treated according to policy and whether that policy is still relevant. We see people updating their policy all the time based on the practicalities of implementing policy. But again, we see that also not happening in many organizations. The good sleepers also have immutable backups with virtual air gaps. So they've got hardened servers, they've bought into at least the latest versions of the software from their vendors, but importantly, they're running them and they've configured them in a way that makes them much more easy to recover from a ransomware attack. And finally, they've implemented cloud and hybrid tools to manage their access, storage, and compute power, rather than really just letting it happen. So I'm Simon Wardle, I'm the Managing Director at Blue Source. Today we'll show you why Veritas and Blue Source are uniquely positioned to help you in these issues, and ultimately to let you get better sleep with perhaps a little aid of some beer, but also some tools and services. So before we go on, I wanted to introduce Matt from Siren Craft Brewery. Matt, would you like to introduce yourself and get us started on whatever you think is the first and best beer to go on with?
Yeah, absolutely. Simon, thanks for having us on. My name is Matt. I'm the events manager at Siren Craft Brew. For those of you who might not have heard of us, we're a small brewery based down in Finch Hampstead, just outside of Reading. Going for around about 8 years now, so still small, 100% independent, family owned, just with a bit of an obsession of creating the tastiest beers that we possibly can. But we'll go on to a little bit more on that later. I think in terms of the first beer to try, so I'll just introduce it, and then I can hand back to Simon, back to the business section, but you'll be able to drink this through that. So if you want to grab your cans of Santo, which is this one here, so it's our dry hopped lager. Always nice to start off with a lager, nice and refreshing. We're all pretty familiar with what a lager is, so it doesn't need a huge amount of introduction. But there's quite a bit of history behind this beer. It was originally a collaboration with a California or a US-based brewery who have Mexican roots, and really it was designed to be the ultimate comfort food pairing beer. So picture yourself with a big plate of nachos or some burritos or something like that on a Saturday or a lazy Sunday, with various pints of these, and absolutely pair perfectly together. But essentially what you've got here is a modern craft lager. So the lager base, refreshing, but with some floral notes and some hoppy notes, it gives it a little bit of something else. So yeah, enjoy Santo. I'll talk about, I'll answer any questions you've got about it a little bit later on, but I'll hand back to Simon now and for the rest of the business.
Thanks, Matt. Ian, very impressed by your tankard, by the way. I suppose it's not all about how big your tankard is. Anyway, if anybody wants to ask Matt questions, we've got a section later on for him to do that. But if there are any questions along the way, please put up your hand. Use the Zoom questions and answers, and we'll include those in the session as we go along. So over the last 20 years, BlueSource and Veritas have been helping organizations to protect, govern, move, and manage their data. There has never really been a better time to be a Veritas customer, because if you now look at the portfolio around net backup, data insight, EV, most of these products have had significant improvements in the last 6 months. And I'm really pleased to be able to cover these products today. Now, I'd like to introduce Ian Wood, who has been with Veritas, I think now over 25 years, been in the data management scene 25 years, and is an absolute legend in this area. So Ian, perhaps you'd like to take over before we crack into any more beers.
Yeah, thank you, Simon. I think this could be the first time I'm presenting with a beer in my hand and everybody else has a beer, which is refreshing, I guess. So thank you for the opportunity. Hopefully everybody can see my screen. So I feel like that advert between now and the YouTube video that you all wanted to get to, which is potentially the beer tasting. So I'm going to make this as hopefully entertaining and as insightful as possible. And the presentation title that I try to encapsulate quite a lengthy series of challenges that may be keeping you awake at night if you haven't got a grip on them. I just simplified that to the digital transformation gap, because within Veritas, what we do is data management. And what we've noticed is that there seems to be an ever-growing gap in resiliency of data, fueled primarily by digital transformation. So the first area we've noticed is that many organizations, potentially like yourselves, have gone through massive change in the last year, whether that's change is natural through digital transformation, businesses changing, or those businesses changing because it's been forced upon them through a global pandemic. The net is transformation, and the transformation is accelerating. And I think IT have almost done heroic events in the last 12 months to scramble around to make sure that we support their customers, we support their users internally in a different way of working, or potentially in organizations finding new routes to market to change their business. But as I said earlier, as that acceleration pace has increased, we see that actually data protection, data management has not increased in the same pace. And let's be honest, there's probably a good reason, right? Because when things are happening so fast and furious, no one wants to be the no people to say you can't do that. We need to check on the data protection. We need to check on the data strategy. So there is a gap that's created. We see the gap really around the 4 C's, as I call them. We see the gap, one, in customers accelerating their journey to the cloud, forced upon through digital transformation, realizing that the cloud, or most public cloud providers, don't provide data protection in something we call a shared responsibility model. And they then find out that they need to protect or govern the data, because in essence, the cloud or public clouds, what they're providing is infrastructure, not data management. That's really our jobs or your jobs to do. We see a shift and a gap in cyber. That's because I couldn't find another C. I really want to zone in on ransomware. Simon mentioned this earlier, and ransomware is unfortunately exploded in the last 12 months. And actually in the last couple of weeks, if you may know, headline news continues, whether you unfortunately in the Irish healthcare sector, which yet again had significant outages, or perhaps in some of the areas of the Merseyside rail, or perhaps in the US where the major pipeline or oil company was taken down in headline news. But ransomware is real. We've seen a shift in the ransomware attackers being disorganized, ultimately opportunistic, and in many ways lucky to get out there, to moving to organizations themselves, very organized. They themselves have CEOs. They have many employees that are criminals in essence, are hacking. And I would suggest that more Bitcoin has flown across the wires than anybody cares to admit. In a recent ransomware resiliency survey we did, we noticed the UK and I as an area that are most likely to pay the ransom. And when I dug a bit deeper into why the UK the most likely to pay a ransom, is ultimately we realized that the gap there is many organizations haven't kept their data protection strategy up to date, and therefore they don't have a simple let's quick and restore our data. They pretty much snook it in many ways and are forced to pay the ransom, and is not a good position. As many would say, we should not be negotiating with criminals. So you need a backup and recovery mechanism to recover your data. Compliance continues, and I'm going to talk a little bit more. I'm going to triple click down the compliance in the next few slides, and I'll talk about that. And then lastly, I don't know about anybody else on the call, certainly many have been asked to do more with flat to declining budgets. So these are the 4 C's: cloud, cyber, compliance, and cost, that I see everybody wrestling with. And for those that may watch Channel 5, the Hoarders show, my wife is a particular favorite of the show. I personally can't stand it, but everybody has their own flavor of shows. You'll notice that this is a picture from someone that's hoarding. And the reason I put this in is actually one of the biggest areas of challenge is that most organizations, most employees, and most individuals are data hoarders. We hang on to things with a promise that in the future they may deliver fantastic results. We don't really care about the cost of storing everything forever. We don't ultimately tackle the big classification projects to understand what's valuable and what's not. And we amass a huge amount of data. And our data in many organizations that I deal with on a daily basis looks a little bit like someone from the Channel 5 show, The Hoarders, where we're storing everything. Most organizations find it easier to buy more storage. Hell, storage is cheap is the argument I get. Most people buy more storage. I kind of think of it as buying another bedroom or another garage to store more stuff in. And actually, the problem isn't just the cost of the extra storage or garage or room. The cost really comes down into the risk of that data. That's really where the cost comes in, the cost of managing that data, clogging up backup and recovery systems with data that frankly is older than what you require and should be deleted at source. We run another survey called the Databerg survey. And this is a survey we run globally and also in the UK. And this is the UK data that ultimately backs up my view that data is largely dark. And what it says is that 53% of data on average in the UK is dark data. and ultimately 19% is critical business data, and 28% is ROT, which stands for redundant, obsolete, and trivial data. And every time I work with customers, I don't think they argue with me. They normally say we're about the same, or they would say we're probably worse. But what's interesting is they don't really know the actual data. They don't know where the data could be stored that shouldn't be stored in OneDrive or other file and share cloud services. They don't quite know where their critical data is that should have that right lifecycle policy. And what's growing trend is, if you look at compliance, it's difficult to understand in the unstructured world where personal identifiable information resides. And so the call to action number one there is really to get a grip on your dark data, understand what is valuable, what is not, and start to manage data more and more effectively. And I think that's ultimately going to help you close that gap, that resiliency gap that you have. This wasn't meant to be a Veritas sales pitch, but I will mention that what we really believe in is that ultimately you should build a data services platform. Where possible, standardize on tools. There's nothing worse than, I call it the whack-a-mole of tools that get built out there to do very similar jobs in organizations that ultimately lead to fragmentation and complexity. Ultimately look to standardize on data management tools, data protection tools. And what we do, as this is the sales pitch, is ultimately we provide availability, we provide protection, and we provide insights to data. So those are the three services we look to deliver. If I was cleverer with PowerPoint, I would start to flip it around to be insights, protection, and availability. And ultimately, that would be the IPA of data management. But actually, on that note, why don't I hand back to the team, and we can, if you have finished your beer, maybe it's a good time to segue to crack open another beer.
Matt, yeah, go for it, Matt.
Yeah, cool. So yeah, I mean, if anyone's, like I said, if anyone's got any questions about Santo, then feel free to ask. We'll probably spend a little bit more time in this part talking about beer, but like I say, Santo really was designed to be refreshing, designed to be something that you can drink and enjoy with food. Classic lager in the sense of how it's brewed, but then obviously adding in lots of different hops to give those kind of floral kind of notes to it, giving it something else. You'll notice that, unlike a classic lager, there's a lot of haze to it, and that's coming from the hops, and that's where all that kind of beautiful flavors coming from. We're going to move on to something a little bit different for those of you who have got an empty glass, and I'm just going to grab mine now. So just bear with me while I just go and grab that.
While Matt's doing that, my workstation is in my study, which overlooks the road, and everyone who walks by can look in. And one guy just walked by and seen me in front of my PC with 8 or 9 beers next to me. I suspect he doesn't think I'm doing much work.
So we've gone from a fairly traditional style, modernized, and again, as I said, what Siren do is we make craft beer. We don't talk about traditional ales in that sense. It's not what we're doing, although they do have a nod to tradition a lot of the time. So we're going to go on to a bit of a mad beer here, which is, again, this is completely different from Santo. I'm going to have to show you how to pour this, because there is and it sounds weird, so bear with me, but a specific way to pour this. So this is what we're going to go on to next, which is called Midnight Stacks. So before you grab your, just going to show what you do. And you have to go against all your intuition, all your years of being told how to pour drinks and pour pints, but we have to do something called a hard pour for this. So you grab your glass and you have to pour it like this. So completely against everything that, if you've ever done any bar work or anything like that, everything everyone's ever told you. But what you're going to get is you'll get this beautiful cascade, similar to, like a Guinness or a cream flow or something like that. So if you want to go and grab your cans of Midnight Stack, do a hard pour like I've just demonstrated. and then we'll get right into that, because it's a really, really interesting beer.
Thanks, Matt. Back to you, Ian.
Yeah, no problem. It smells lovely. Wow, nice smell to it. Pancake, yeah, and maple. Nice, good. So let me finish the second kind of half of my presentation. So picture the advice is to build an enterprise data services platform that manages your data no matter where it resides, that delivers availability, protection, and insights. And in essence, that's what Veritas do. I want to spend a little bit more time on insights, because I think the discussion around today's topic was around governance, around ransomware. And normally where customers ask, where do I start? I normally instruct to start with insights. Ultimately, what you can't see, you can't manage. And so that's a very important element. And so around the insights perspective, from a Veritas side, we have a suite of technology that provides digital compliance and ransomware awareness to organizations, part of a detect strategy that we have. And if I look at number one is actually from Veritas, we made a very recent acquisition, if you follow Veritas, of an organization called Merge1. And what Merge1 is allowing us to do is to continue to capture more data. And what we've noticed is, accelerated through COVID, organizations are adopting many more different collaboration platforms, Teams chats, Zoom, WhatsApp. You can imagine all the different, if you're in different environments, you could have, if you're in finance, you could have Bloomberg, Reuters applications. There's so many different types of collaboration. And in order to remain compliant, to manage that data more effectively, we acquired an organization called Merge1 that has over 120 data source collectors for different collaboration platforms and unstructured data. And ultimately, that allows organizations to capture that data. The second area that we look at from compliance is to visualize data. And I know part of the invite out here was to do a dark data assessment. We've got a technology called Data Insight that allows you to go out there and understand and visualize your unstructured data sources. So the first part is capturing data. The second part is visualizing that data. Where is my sensitive data? Where is my personal identifiable information? In fact, over 900 data classification projects that we could put into it, and using machine learning, we're able to tell you in your unstructured data where types of data reside, and then you can visualize that. You can visualize share and data ownership, and what we call as inferred data ownerships. Who's actually accessing data? For example, who's accessing data that shouldn't be accessing data? And perhaps someone's accessing data and all of a sudden they're doing a lot of reading of data and a lot of writing of data, and then alert you that could be a ransomware attack encrypting your data so that you can manage that more effectively. So I mentioned part of the suite that we have is classification, and our classification can classify that unstructured data that we have through Data Insight. We can also classify data ultimately in the archive, a vault. An Enterprise Vault and Enterprise Vault.cloud are technologies we've had in Veritas since an acquisition in 2005, so a very long time. And as the name suggests, it vaults your data. So the idea is you can capture your data, you can visualize your data, you can classify your data, and then if you need to, you can store the right data in an archive, in a vault, and make sure that that data is retained for only as long as it needs to. And that vault can be on premises, or very popular now, that vault can be in the cloud. And the reason we vault that data is ultimately that we can monitor the data. So we brought out a new solution suite around supervision. So if you're out there and having to do supervision, understanding who's doing what, and IT normally fit the bill to understand the supervision of how you're managing data, we can add the monitoring capabilities of supervision. And then ultimately, we have the ability at the end of that to do electronic discovery. So whether you're doing electronic discovery of data for compliance, could be something simple like a SARS request, where again, that hits IT, please, someone has asked for us to reveal all their data. They've also asked for the ability to reveal their data. You would need the ability to redact data, so only send the data where they're relevant, because they could be in a shared communication. And that's what the eDiscovery platform does. You also do eDiscovery for litigation purposes, perhaps, maybe HR disputes. And so our eDiscovery platform kind of says it looks for the needle in that haystack of data. So that's a full real compliance suite that we have within Veritas, from capturing the data through a recent acquisition, Emerge One, and that captures unstructured data sources, that captures collaboration platforms, Slack, Zoom, Teams, WhatsApp. There's so many of them. We can visualize data, classify data. All of that gets stored in a vault, in an archive, and then you can add monitoring and discovery. Organizations can purchase one particular product for one particular need, or I look at this as a suite of offerings around digital compliance within that. My final two slides, I think as an offer, coming back to us, we do, and BlueSource in partnership together, we do a lot of what we call dark data assessments. If you picture the data berg I had in the beginning, where potentially you could be an organization that doesn't really know where your valuable data is, doesn't really know where your old stagnant data is that should be deleted. In fact, we have some examples where we found data that really shouldn't be there, is illegal data, or potentially could be data of one of your competitors that shouldn't be on your file servers. Then you're able to go and understand that data. And a dark data assessment is used to give you a light touch. There are deeper assessments we could do, but normally used to do a light touch to understand what your dark data looks like in your environment, and often builds a business case to go out there and take data management more seriously, and therefore drilling deeper to raise a business case to invest in a data management solution that can manage data, as I kind of say, not just for Christmas, but for all times, especially if you're moving to cloud, for example. Big use cases, understand all your unstructured data on premises before you go into a migration to the cloud project. So you know you're storing the right data for the right needs, the right duration. As I said, that was my second last slide. This is just some screen grabs of some dark data assessments to give you an example of what kind of information a dark data assessment uses. You can see there we have storage consumption by age, we have file count by age, we have when last data was modified, and that's pretty straightforward to find out, but we can go a lot deeper. We can integrate to your Active Directory, we can understand ownership, we can integrate deeper into your environment as well, and we can understand which departments are using what, where sensitive data resides per share name. And we have something we call a risk score. And a risk score means that you have share locations and sensitive data that we've decided upon and classified, but has users that are quite wide. And another screenshot I don't show you is a spider graph of who's accessing what and how. And in the final screenshot there is an example of a report we can give, but for potential ransomware. So again, go out there and discover where we could have data that looks and feels a lot like data that's been encrypted or ransomware data out there. So you can have that early warning detection. We also actually are monitoring data write and read patterns constantly, so that again, if we've got, let's say it's Mary or Bob on a typical day, we profile them, read and write data, but all of a sudden, Mary and Bob have a massive spike of reading and writing data that uncharacteristic. We can integrate and send you alerts as well. So these screen grabs are from a technology I call Data Insight, which visualizes your data. And there's a lot more that we can offer around that. So that's my pitch. That was my advertisement before the hopefully exciting YouTube video of the beer sampling. So I know we're going to hand over to lots of Q&A and hopefully some more discussion. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Ian. Let me just go back to the slides. So just to follow up and sum up really on Ian's pitch, the we're using data insight in a number of different organizations and have done for some time. As one example, we are using data insight in the National Health Service around GP practices, where they are seeking to ensure that they are meeting their compliance requirements around ensuring the right data is in the right places. But there's also the other benefits to them about really understanding, again, what data they should be holding and what data they shouldn't be holding. So it's a really great example of how that product can be sold, used, and the benefits that come from it. We've also actually very recently been working with a household name insurance company, again, to help them around compliance of their data. So they need to prove to the regulator that they have put their data in the right places and that they're not sending out the wrong data to the wrong people. And so again, data insights we are providing on a managed service basis to them, and helping them do that on an ongoing basis. As Ian said, we often start with what's called an assessment, and whether that's net backup to look at a health check on net backup for your backup services, or whether it's a dark data assessment using data insights, or any number of other shadow data assessments that we provide. This is always where we start to really get a fundamental understanding of what the problem is, and then we have the tool sets on top to then put that problem right. So if any of you on the call today are interested in the assessments that we can provide, then please contact us either through your account manager or on the mail on the screen in front of you. So I'm going to pause now for any questions. I noticed that one has come through, and I'll put that question over to Ian in a second. After that, if there's no more questions at this point, I'll pass back to Matt, who can take us through the rest of the beer. I have to say, the Midnight Stack is unbelievable. I mean, I've never tasted anything like that in a stout. It's absolutely mind-blowing. So really interesting beer. But yeah, the question was, can we buy data insights on a SaaS basis rather than a perpetual license basis?
Yes, I think the answer, there is a subscription option within Data Insight. If that answers the question, hopefully there is that capability within the product, or perpetual. The context for us as the managed service provider is that we can often, if you were looking for a service, be the short term, or you're scaling or up your volumes or reducing them down, or you need flexibility, then we will offer a SaaS-based license rental on Veritas products. Virtually all of them have that model now, which has been around for a while, but is now much more fits the market a lot better. So as a managed service provider, we use that as a big important part of the recipe. Am I picking up any other questions at this minute? No, I think let's move on to Matt.
Awesome, thanks, Simon. Yeah, your comment on Midnight Stack was interesting. It's a bit of a mad beer. I mean, two kind of parts of it is that. So the reason that we did this hard pour is the reason why it's called a nitro. So what we're doing with this is you'll be familiar with that kind of the settling, the flow that you get with Guinness, for example. It's the same concept, but what we're doing is we're using liquid nitrogen when we're canning our beers. These cans then sit to the side for 5 days, absorb obviously the liquid nitrogen turns into gas, they absorb it, and then when you do this hard pour, it kind of the easiest way to kind of envisage it is it breaks up the crystals and creates this beautiful kind of flow. And this is great because what you can do is it gives it this really thick, velvety, creamy mouthfeel, and can make a beer that, interestingly, at 4.2% is very low ABV for how it feels, and it takes it to the next level. So not only does it make it feel very luxurious when actually, at 4.2% is pretty chilled out. It gives this beautiful texture, but We've been playing around with it since we introduced nitro into our beers. I think we're the only brewery in the UK who are currently doing it, so it's a relatively new technology. I think this is probably one of my favorites. It actually appeared on Sunday Brunch fairly recently with Simon Rimmer and Tim Lovejoy. It got the thumbs up from everyone. So we're happy with that. So it's been on TV. If it's good enough for Louise Redknapp, then it should be good enough for all of us, right? But yeah, super incredible beer. The maple flavor comes from not just maple syrup, but we actually use maple wood, and we use wood chips that have been from a barrel where maple has been aged. So you're getting all these different layers of flavor. The actual maple syrup and these kind of woody vanilla characters coming from the oak, and these like kind of bourbon-like characters as well. So lots of layers of flavor, lots of complexity. So it's a really kind of intricate beer, but drinks, almost like one of those luxurious hot chocolates you get from Costa or something like that. So, and at 4.2%, it's quite easy going. It's not too. It's not. You could probably have a few of them if you can take the sweetness. That is. But I mean, the two beers we've tasted today really kind of sums up Siren in a nutshell. Really, we've got one fairly traditional style. Obviously being a lager that we've modernized and we've changed up, and then you've got this nitro beer which uses the newest technology available to brewers at the moment. Really kind of interesting ingredients, layers of flavors and things like that. So two completely different beers. Two fantastic beers. Hopefully everyone's enjoying them. I'm going to keep an eye on kind of the Q&A panel. Simon, I think there's a question that's come up for you actually, if you want to answer that quickly, potentially.
All right, well, I'll read it out. With ransomware, there is an added importance of air-gap data copies. With significant volumes of stale data, a lot could be difficult to recover due to ages of backups. What tools can Veritas provide to provide early warning, easy recovery to a pre-encryption point in time? Are the tools integrated to provide a most recent save and restore feature? Ian, I think you're best placed to answer that. Did you get the question?
I think I did. Yeah, I think what you're saying, Adrian, is that you've got to keep an air-gapped copy of your data. So if your data starts to get encrypted, your best known copy is on a backup device because it's air-gapped. So typically, if your backup device is air-gapped, right, then there's a good sense of trust that the data that you come back with is good. Now, there is a catch in that. I think this is where you're getting at. The catch is that ransomware doesn't infect your environment as it enters. It enters and lies dormant, hiding in the cupboard to then eventually affect. So I think the question could be, are there technologies out there that when you do constant backup, that ultimately you're recovering where you're not recovering this dormant ransomware that's going to come out and reinfect your environment? And there is a good question there, Adrian. Firstly, great best practices of air gaps and 3-2-1 copies, as we call them in Veritas. And I think my experience is very few customers do actually air gap it. So they suffer, not from your question, which I'll get to the answer, they suffer from there's actually recent example we got involved with where luckily not our technology, but an organization was protecting on a competitive technology based on standard Windows servers that weren't very well patched, weren't very well secure. And actually what we've noticed is the ransomware attackers are going into backup devices to encrypt the data, because then the customer, the individuals have no leverage, right? Because you can't just restore. So air gapping, on your point, is really good. It's really important. Now, coming back to your question, we are working with technology, and there are ways and means we work with organizations that you can do malware detection as you start backing up the data to the backup copy, if that makes sense. And that gives you a double safe version, because what you have is you've gone through the malware protection as the data moves to the backup copy, and therefore you've got a good sense that the data is secure and that you can trust it when you recover. So there's nothing lurking and hiding. Also in our net backup product, if you are a net backup user, and I'm talking a bit roadmappy here, but not that far away, we are looking at providing that ransomware detection as part of the backup environment. We kind of have that with Data Insight, which is standalone technology, and we'd implement that anyway. But there are ways and means we're adopting into the backup environment to make sure that as part of the net backup world, you're able to detect any ransomware files that could be being backed up, so that you know that nothing lurking in your recovery. And also something I didn't talk about, a technology called Aptar, which we acquired to do infrastructure monitoring. And Aptar, in the latest release, just released a couple of weeks ago, actually now integrates into net backup and also has ransomware detection capability. So you're able to look at the net backup, what we call it, the catalog, the brains, and look at the data to see if there's any ransomware files that may exist. So this is probably a very long answer to a question of hopefully giving you some answer, but actually expanding for the audience. Air gapping is critical. I mean, it's a really interesting topic, because we've worked with customers that their backup's been encrypted and you've got no point of recovery, not a nice place to be. So definitely air gap it. And then there's an age-old debate, because arguably the best air gap is tape. My first career was a tape drive engineer 25 years ago, right? And I'd certainly say tape should be dead, backing up to tape, but actually, ironically, it's the best form of air gapping, because it's on a tape, it's in a vault, it's somewhere else, but it doesn't give you good recovery capability. So organizations are building what we call vaults. And we've been working with many customers, large and small, right now to build ransomware vaults. So they're making sure they have an air-gapped copy that is on disk, but which provides fast recovery, but with the immutability. That's a big word for I cannot change it in the backup copy. So that's, gosh, a big sales pitch. So for Veritas, it's about an air-gapped copy. It's about an immutable copy so that it can't be encrypted. But then coming to your very good question, Adrian, a really complex question around if you do recover, is it safe? That's about integrating with malware technology before your backup, which we see customers doing. And now enhancements to net backup to check for safe copies coming. And then Aptar, which can integrate into net backup and tell you if there's any ransomware files out there. But before that, it was hit and miss. Recover the data, do the scan. Does that make sense? Recover data, do the scan before it gets to encrypt. And many customers have done that as well. But great question, Adrian. Nice complex question as well.
Thank you, Ian. Just to back up your comments, we've worked with 3 customers probably in the last, I guess, 3 months, where through no air gapping they've had ransomware attacks, and the ransomware's got into the backups, and they're bereft. It's grim. So. None of them paid, interestingly, or none of them paid as far as we know. So, and so they were literally rebuilding from scratch. So, yeah, air gaps and immutable backups key. Matt, back to you. I'm still kind of holding back from the midnight stack for the full glass load, but I'm very tempted.
Yeah, no, thanks, Simon. I thought after Ian's very intricate explanation, maybe I should go into some technicalities of beer, rather than just talking about how delicious they are and just trying to get everyone a little bit tipsy. But we kind of talk about beer. I do lots of these tastings, and just one of these things that everyone, that people seem to know. Kind of what's going on, and or should I say, I assume that people know what beer is, because asking someone what is beer seems to be a bit of a stupid question, because we all drink it, on a daily basis, but there's probably a lot of intricacies that will kind of explain a lot about what I'm talking about. So I'll just give you a quick crash course in brewing beer. Now I'm going to make it sound simple. Because they're, on the basis, and I guess like anything, it is simple, and then there's a lot of things you can do, a lot of variables you can change that's going to make it more complex. But on the basis, it is quite a simple process. So essentially, you've got 4 ingredients and 4 processes that stands between you and creating a beer. So the 4 ingredients in beer is water, yeast, hops, and barley, or specifically malted barley. So what you do is you take your malted barley. We don't do that; the maltsters do it. So we'll buy this barley in, and then you steep this barley or the malted barley in hot water. And the point of this process is really just to draw the sugar out of the malts. This is called the mash phase and probably lasts around about 60 minutes. And by the end of this phase, you're going to have just this sugary liquid called wort. I'm not sure if we still do it. I'm not sure if, but if technically we're allowed to do this anymore. But there's a bit of a thing called a brewer's breakfast, because what you'll do is you'll start brewing really early in the morning, and the brewer's breakfast essentially is a shot of malt and a shot of whiskey, and you have that around about 8 in the morning. Whether or not that's still acceptable in the current workplace, I don't know. But essentially, it's this really sugary kind of really malty liquid with the whiskey. But if you want to do that, if you want to leave that phase out, you absolutely can. But you're left with this sugary liquid, which is kind of the base of the beer. You then move this into the boil phase. So the reason you're boiling beer is to get rid of bacteria, because bacteria is not good for beer. But also you can start introducing hops into the beer. Now hops serve 2 purposes: bitterness and aroma. So if you put your hops in at the start of the boil, which again is about 60 minutes, this is where you're going to get bitterness. So if the point of what you're trying to do is you brew a bitter, maybe a traditional English bitter, all your hops go in there and you're done, and it boils off for 60 minutes and you get these really complex, lovely bitter flavors. If you want to get more aroma, then you're going to put your hops in towards the end of this process. So after 60 minutes, you're done with that. You're going to move your beer into the fermenter. And the fermenter is pretty much where the magic happens. The saying is that brewers make wort, yeast makes beer, because the yeast is what does all the work really. So you're happy with what you've made so far, with how it tastes, how it smells, the bitterness, everything like that. Put the
for fuck's sake,
yeast in, the yeast is sugar, right? So lots of different variables you can change up, though, that actually mean that these two are still beers, right? We still follow the same processes, but they are completely different. Different hops, different malts that we're using. The flavor from the lager comes all from the hops, but the flavor from this beer comes from the malts, because there's hundreds of different malts. You can use hundreds of different hops. But that is beer in a nutshell, and changing all these things. And I think that's what craft beer is about. And people say, what is craft beer? Why do you do it? It's just the sheer complexity and the excitement of having all these different things that you can do. Even just by changing the hops you use, you can get a completely different beer. The malts, even just if you put the hops in 10 minutes at a different time, the beer is going to be different. So it's just an endless amount of capabilities and endless things you can do to kind of change what the resulting liquid is going to be. So Midnight Snack, obviously, like I say, is a good example, but it uses an ingredient, and I've touched on that, maple syrup, doesn't fall within those 4 ingredients I said. So beer is beer because it's made from those 4 ingredients, just like cider is cider because it's made from apples, wine, grapes, pears, and so on. But outside of those 4 ingredients, you can put anything you want in. Maple syrup, you can put coffee, you can put wood chips. There was even a brewery in America that specifically for the bowl made 2 beers, one to taste like ranch dressing and one to taste like buffalo wings. I don't really want to drink those, to be honest. I've never been in a Harvester and thought I really fancy a pint of ranch. I like it, but just drizzled on my salad is fine. But it's interesting because you can do whatever you want with it, and I think that's why beer is so exciting. I drink wine myself, of course, quite partial to a whiskey, but the flavor profiles of they're very much there. If you have a white wine, it's quite limited into what it can do. Beer, you can make it taste like pancakes, you can make it taste like buffalo wings. Like it's absolutely incredible the amount of things you can do, and that's why you'll probably notice. I mean, all of us are probably not that far from a craft brewery doing some mad things and having a bit of fun, and I think that's why they're popping up and people are so interested in it because it's so exciting.
Massive.
Go on.
I think there's a question from from Adrian again. Do you want me to read it out, or can you see it yourself?
Yeah, no, I can see that. Yeah, so smallest brewery, Mullins, and there are always days when there is a lovely rich aroma around town. What stage of the process is this? So that is, that is a great question. So there's two stages where that comes from, and I think it really depends what they're brewing. So when we're mashing in, you get this really malty, rich kind of aroma. And actually, if you're brewing with these dark beers, these dark malts, you're going to get coffee, you're going to get caramel, toffee kind of notes. It's pretty glorious. It's a real kind of, you get a bit of cereal. It's like a really kind of rich, kind of cereal, grainy kind of, aroma. Hops are very pungent, and they generally have aromas of stone fruits and spices and that. So again, it just really depends what stage they're doing. But yeah, you do get some absolutely incredible kind of aromas just floating around. And definitely, I think we're based on an industrial estate, so I think we do a lot to counter out some of the not so nice aromas that are floating around at sometimes. But yeah, I mean, you described it as a lovely, rich aroma. That that's probably potentially when they're brewing a stout. Using a complex malt bill. You're getting kind of like maybe some figs, some caramel, some toffee, some vanilla. These really kind of rich, intense kind of aromas. But yeah, no, that's that. You are very lucky, because it is a beautiful kind of smell that just wafts around. Yeah, I make a point of any time we're putting beer in cans, just going down to the brewery and just kind of just taking a big breath, and just enjoying those kind of lovely scents that you get from that.
Matt, as a student, I used to brew my own beer from those kits, and a few years have gone by. My son decided to brew one the other day, and I sort of assumed with technology they're much improved. And when he'd finished it, and I don't think it was him, it tasted very much like the beer of sort of 25 years ago, and pretty grim still. What is it about homebrewing that can't mimic the real stuff?
Yeah, it's interesting, because I homebrew myself, and I think mine was more out of intrigue, to really learn the process, to almost kind of just be at one with kind of what's going on, because I'm talking about it all the time, so I should really know kind of the process. But I think that there's a few things that can go wrong. I mean, so essentially, what those homebrew kits do, I think you probably had a syrup, which is which you then dilute with water, so you've taken out that mash phase, because you've got that sugary water already, and pop the yeast in. So I mean, they've done the hard bit for you, really, which is great. The thing that kind of makes beer taste a bit weird, a bit off, is really the fermentation, and it's hard, because that's the most important part, but it's also the hardest to control. Fermentation temperature and keeping it level is the main thing. So we of course use expensive cooling kits and pieces of equipment that help us keep that fermentation temperature level, because what happens is when the yeast starts eating the sugar, and it's like a chemical reaction that creates heat, so then it's going to make the temperature go up and down, and that stresses the yeast out. So that's the real key. We obviously have multi-million-pound brewery, rather than a little glass jar that you chuck stuff in and just put under the cupboard and hope for the best.
Yeah.
Yeah. The key is to try and control that, and to try and have it in a cool environment. It's very hard to do a homebrew kit, to be honest. And even with I've got a fairly high-tech homebrew kit, and I still struggle to create, I'll never create anything on this scale, just the sheer amount of technology and things that we're using to do that. But they're great, and it gives you an idea of the process, and then you can take it to the next level, and you can actually create that work yourself. Just getting some grains, steeping them in hot water, which you could do on the stovetop, and boiling it and all that. But yeah, no, I think it's good fun, and it's interesting to try the fruits of your labour. And I think sometimes when you've made it, it doesn't really matter how it tastes. You just quite enjoy it. So we've had two beers so far. So we've had two completely different beers. We've had this, really rich, malty, lots of maple syrup kind of beer. A lot of the flavors are coming from those and coming from the adjuncts and the things that we put in. And then we've had Santo, which is obviously that traditional lager base with some hops in there to give it some kind of aroma. So I think we'll, if people are kind of up for another beer, we'll open another one. So my suggestion now is that we'll open up Soundwave, which is the small purple can, which is our core range IPA. So it's the IPA. Basically, it's our best-selling beer. We'll move on to that bit. So I'll give everyone just a minute to grab their can and get the beer into a glass. If anyone wants to answer any more questions, I'm keeping on the chat and the Q&A, but feel free to. I'm happy if people want to kind of unmute and put their cameras on and just ask me any questions. Then absolutely feel free to do that.
Well, Matt, in the meantime, why do you can rather than bottle? Is there any difference?
Yeah, so canning is better in a lot of ways. So the main thing that can happen, or the main reason that the canned beer is better than bottled beer is light is not good for beer. If you were to put a bottle of beer on the windowsill and put one on the cupboard, and then in a month's time you try them next to each other, the one that had been on the windowsill is not going to taste great, because light really does affect beer. So the best kind of example of why a can is better is that it's going to let zero light in. And actually, from a brewery's perspective, the end product, when a customer drinks it, is always going to taste best, as close to what we want people to drink it if they're having it fresh from the brewery. Lots of other great reasons as well. I mean, they're so much easier to recycle, less resource intensive to recycle. And as a brewery, we're always trying to figure out ways that we can kind of do things that are kind of easier on the environment. Also, they're cheaper to transport. They're a lot lighter. So these cans come in printed, they get delivered to us. It's a lot, less resource intensive to deliver them to us. We can stack them in the brewery. It's not a good idea to stack glass bottles in the brewery. I've seen lots of videos on YouTube where that goes very wrong. And also, from a branding perspective, we've got a bigger canvas for kind of all this beautiful artwork that we really enjoy doing. So yeah, lots of benefits really. Glass bottles do look better in a kind of a more romantic kind of way, and we do have a bottling line, and we do bottle our barrel aged beers. So we do lots of barrel aging, and they all go into bottles. But for the most part, cans are really king for lots of different reasons. The other great part of it is, in supermarkets, supermarkets want cans these days. If you want to kind of increase your where you can get your beers, then you really need to be in cans. Again, for those reasons stated, cheaper to transport, cheaper to store, easier to store. So supermarkets are all about the cans at the moment.
Interesting, because I thought I think it was probably an old wives' tale, but I thought there was some concept of, if it was canned, it would taste of metal, whereas if it was in a bottle, it didn't taste of anything. But clearly, that's rubbish, is it?
I think that probably was true, 15, 20 years ago. I think canning technology has come a long way since then. There is no plastic, so I think there was a plastic lining within the cans, but we don't use that, and I think most people don't anymore. So it is pretty much. I think it's just the technology's come on a far way. When I first started within the industry, my father was always of the of that very much of an old school kind of, if it's hazy, then it's off, and if it's in a can, then it's going to taste metallic. But those are the kind of things that came from the past, and certainly they probably were true then. But we have come a long way since then that they're not so true anymore. Yeah, absolutely. But for those of you who have opened your can of Soundwave, so this is our core range IPA. So I talk about core range. So all the ones that you've got in your small cans, these are core range beers. These are the ones we produce all year round. They're easily available. You can get them direct from us. You can get them in supermarkets. You can get them, come summer, winter, spring, whatever. Whereas the ones that are in the taller cans, these are all special. And these specials are one-off batches. We normally probably brew around 6,000 litres of them, which is a fair amount, don't get me wrong. But once they're gone, and we generally don't brew them again. It's where we have a bit of fun. It's where we can be creative. It's where we can try new things out. But the core range is, is where people, if they want to be, take a bit of a punt and have a bit of fun and try something different, they can get our specials. But if you want to just have a really nice pint, you know what you're going to get. It's going to taste the same all the time. Then you can head for one of our core range, and that's where Soundwave sits. And that's our core range IPA. So 5.6%. Quite punchy, quite lots of tropical flavors, lots of mango. It's quite intense, but it's really, really flavoursome. It's got a lot of flavour going in. And yeah, mango really does come to the fore in all these kind of tropical flavours. And an IPA at the moment is the king of styles, right? So you probably, everywhere you go, you probably see IPAs. And the reason for that is because you can get lots of flavour into them. They're very balanced. They're usually quite a higher ABV, so maybe you have slightly less of them. You don't need to drink them in volume, that's for sure, especially at 5.6%. You can trust me on that one. I've a few times I've had probably a few more than I should have. But it's such a great style. It's so versatile, and just the way it's brewed and the ingredients they use, it gives it this really kind of lovely, intense backbone that you're kind of able to kind of pack a load of flavour into it. I think there might be a question for you, Simon, or maybe Ian on the Q&A.
Yeah, yes, thanks, Stephen. Let me read it out. It's insurance I work in, so migrating standard contracts are relatively painless, but when you start looking at complex commercial and niche products and trying to lift and shift, it's then the issues transpire. I'll have a go at this and then hand over to Ian, because maybe I'm missing it. We, where you're doing cloud migrations of workloads, we employ a number of tool sets, including one of the Veritas products, to allow for analysis of the workload prior to movement, and whether that can be moved to a PaaS environment, for instance, rather than a pure lift and shift. So that upfront analysis of the nature of the workload is a key part of the migration work that we do for our clients before we do that migration. And then once it has been migrated, we then look at optimization going forwards in a managed service way. So, Ian, I don't know, maybe I've missed the point, but do you have anything to, any comment on that?
Yeah, I think it is. I think Stephen was coming back. We were almost, I guess, using Q&A as chat. And I think Stephen's first question, I think it was more of a comment in a good way. He said he works in compliance and particularly interested in comments around migration. We spent multiple years migrating contracts to new administration system. It's becoming more cloud-based. It's a complete earache, to put it politely. So I think what Stephen's saying, and hopefully it's okay you shared that, because just realized it was to all. But I think we were kind of sharing our notes on cloud migrations. And I think I came back and saying, we hear you, it's a real challenge. Normally what we see is finding the right data, the ownership of the data, and then migrating it across is the real challenge. Is that the same for you? And that's when I think Stephen came back and said, it's more the complex contracts that are in those systems with niche products that they find difficult. So I think your answer is about spot on there, Simon. So I think partnering, what we can do at Veritas is the tools that can help uncover the ownership, the data, classify the data, which is a real trend at the moment, especially customers moving from filers on premises, for example, with massive amount of data. It could be just tons of PDF documents, Excel spreadsheets, all those kind of things, which we call semi-structured data. And then some, as you came back, kind of wrapping it around, you could put that as more holistically looking at the workloads.
Okay, thank you. Hopefully that answers it. But by all means, throw us some more questions either about beer or about data management. Matt, any more from you?
Yeah, I mean, you know, like you said, Simon, feel free to chat some more questions in. But yeah, just a little bit more on kind of Soundwave. You know, kind of with the flavors that you get from it. I mean, this is our best-selling beer. So this is the kind of beer that you would see in pubs up and down the country. You know, something that we sell an awful lot of at our tap yard. And for those of you who have opened it, it's probably quite easy to see why. You know, it's such an intense kind of fruit flavour. Lots of mangoes, lots of grapefruit, and you know, I've spoken about beer. You know, Midnight Stack, where the flavour's coming from the malts. Santo, where the flavours mainly is coming from the hops, but actually, interestingly, the flavour in Soundwave mainly comes from the yeast. Now we use our very own house yeast. It's something that we've developed over you know, the last kind of 8 years that we've been around for. And it's probably similar to, I don't know how many, I've seen lots of pictures on social media of people suddenly getting into sourdough bread making over the lockdown. You know, it's a similar concept that the yeast will develop over time. So we've kind of, you know, created this, I guess, from a Vermont style yeast, which is American yeast. And to the point where we were quite happy with it. So, you know, it kind of, we froze it and we now get samples of it every time we need to use it. So it's completely unique to us. We don't use any kind of standard yeast. It's always that one that we're using. Santo is a bit of a different example because that uses a lager yeast, of course. But it makes our beers completely unique. And it means that you won't get those kind of flavors anywhere in other beers. You'll get similar flavors, of course, but every kind of Siren beer has this really kind of unique kind of taste and flavor to it, which is, you know, which is super exciting. We've only ever let one other brewery use it before, and that was one of their highest rated beers of all time. So maybe that's a coincidence. I don't know. I don't know if we'll take all the credit for that. But you know, it's a very coveted kind of yeast strain within the industry. So we're kind of really super proud of it, and it sounds like that Lee is enjoying the beers as well, which is always great to hear. But yeah, you know, like I say, we just you know, everyone at Siren is completely obsessed with making the tastiest beers that we possibly can. You know, and we make all kinds of beers. You know, we've had a 5% lager, a 4.2% milk stout, and a 5.6% IPA. We do lots of barrel aging as well, where we put beers into barrels to kind of draw in those lovely kind of oaky vanilla flavors, and or you know, and whatever the flavors are that's already been in the barrel, you know, be it bourbon, tequila, rye whiskey, red wine, white wine. And then some of those beers kind of get up to 13.5%. So pretty punchy. I wouldn't recommend drinking them in pints. We don't sell them in pints. We sell them in 1/3 because that's probably enough. And they drink somewhere like a port, you know, or a fortified wine or something like that. You know, it's a sipper. It's not a drinker, but you know, this goes to show the wide variety of beers that we brew. I think last year was probably about 88 different beers that we brewed. You know, different styles, different flavor profiles, different things going on, and yeah, it's just a real obsession from our side. You know, always trying new things and trying to brew the best possible beer that we can brew.
Great. And is there any science behind the small can versus big can from the marketing perspective?
I think it. I think it's more of a price point thing. I mean, you know, we're quite conscious that as an artisan product, you know, the price point can get, you know, up there because you know, when you're using the finest ingredients and you're putting all that kind of time and love into it, it does add to the cost. And I think we're conscious of not trying to price people out. So, you know, one of the benefits of having the smaller cans is that people can enjoy craft beer, but without having to, you know, some of our big cans come in at £7 a can just because of the amount of ingredients we're putting in and the amount of kind of, you know, everything that goes into it. So using smaller cans is sometimes when they get into that higher ABV, it's about moderating people's drinking. Not everyone would want a big can of a 10% beer, but it's also price point is also important. Trying to make our beer as accessible to people as we possibly can. So, I wouldn't say necessarily a kind of like a science, but not only are we trying to do mad, incredible things, but also trying to be as inclusive as possible. Making sure that our beers are vegan as much as we can, vegetarian. We produce a range of gluten-free beers, low ABV beers, high ABV beers for all tastes. So being accessible, and the smaller cans kind of fit into that category in terms of a price point. I guess just like any other business would offer different levels of service. That's kind of where they sit in for us, I guess.
Matt, could we visit the brewery? I live just outside Reading. Do you do like tours and things like that, or is it okay?
Absolutely, yeah. So we've got a little bar on site, so you can come to our kind of our tap yard, and at the moment it's a very well. Actually, now it's indoors. We can fit a few people indoors, but you can sit outside in the sun and enjoy. It's the best place to enjoy the freshest beers, because we brew it there, we put it in a keg, it goes on tap. Sometimes you can be drinking a beer that's only been in the keg for half an hour. Super fresh. We do brewery tours, or we will be doing brewery tours. When we were allowed to again. But yeah, normally our kind of brewery is a bit of a hive of activity, and in normal times we'll have little festivals there that attract kind of 700 to 800 people.
Wow.
Having some live music on, some street food, lots of beer, lots of food, lots of fun. Absolutely, you can come down anytime. We also have a shop on site as well, so you can just pop in and buy some beers. Absolutely,
Nice.
yeah.
Good.
Yeah, we're very much looking forward to when things get back to normal, whatever normal looks like, I guess. Having people be able to walk around the brewery and see the equipment that we use, and we even every now and then just when the brewers aren't looking, we take a little sample out of the tank and drink it fresh. We always get into trouble for that, but
is it worth doing one last one before we close up?
Sure.
One last beer, Matt.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I'll introduce what would be a good one too. So Broken Dream actually might be a good one. So Broken Dream is another dark beer. So similar kind of in flavor profile to Midnight Stack, I guess. It's got those dark kind of caramel flavors. So if anyone wants to drink along while I kind of talk about it, grab your can of Broken Dream and pop it in your glass. But it's a stout, a breakfast stout specifically, which doesn't mean you should be drinking it at breakfast. Although with the year that we've had, if it helps you get through the day, then fair play. It's definitely a beer that will crack open sometimes in the morning after a pretty hard week. But it's a breakfast stout in the sense that that's the name of the style. So the style essentially has oats in the recipe. Oats being a breakfast item, and that's kind of what defines it as a style. Now, there's probably around about 200 different beer styles, which is quite an interesting concept, because most people, maybe outside of the industry, could probably name maybe 5 or 6, like lager, pale ale, IPA, stout. But within those, there's subgenres that all have different characteristics, different flavors, different bodies, different textures. But breakfast stout essentially is a fairly easygoing in terms of the style. It's very easy drinking. The oats give it some kind of richness and some creaminess, but we've taken it to the next level by adding a lot of coffee into it, which obviously makes it even more of a breakfast item, I guess. But also adding chocolate malts into it as well, and some smoked malts. So what you'll get is almost like an amalgamation of lots of different items from a breakfast, and it was a recipe that was kind of I think the inspiration really was different breakfasts from different countries. You could say that the chocolate comes from maybe chocolate chip muffin or kind of pancakes, Nutella on your pancakes. The smoked malts come from kind of the smoked meats that you might get in Germany, and smoked sausage and things like that. Obviously the coffee, everyone has coffee for breakfast, right? It's essentially what wakes us up and gets us through the day. The lactose kind of represents the cream, so it gives it some creaminess, some sweetness. So all these kind of influences from different breakfast habits pushed into what is already dubbed a breakfast stout. So I guess we've just taken it to the next level and just made it a bit mad, but a really decadent but quite easy drinking beer. It's a beer that you could definitely have as a dessert on its own, standalone dessert. It's great in cooking, actually. If you're making a steak and ale pie, pop a little bit of this in. There's actually a local pie shop to us that make an award-winning beef brisket pie with this in, which is absolutely sublime. So it works fantastically. Also in a tiramisu as well, a great kind of base for it. Or if you're a cocktail lover, an espresso martini, you can pop a little bit of this into the mix, and it gives it that little bit of a kick. So beer is also quite diverse. You can use it in cooking, you can use it desserts, cocktail making, baking, and all these things as well, just to give just on what you're kind of creating up to that next level. I've just seen a comment from John that said, when I can drink again, I have 6 cans of nitro stout in my fridge ready. Nice. Yeah, absolutely. Nitro is, it's a really exciting kind of technology. We're super happy to be able to experiment with it. I think we're the only brewery, like I say, in the UK that are currently using nitro within their canning line. And actually, Midnight Stack originally was a special for Sainsbury's. They approached us and said that they wanted to bring out a pancake-inspired beer for Shrove Tuesday. So we came up with this, and yeah, we enjoyed it. They enjoyed it. So I think we'll be brewing a lot more of it. Fingers crossed, because it's probably one of my favourite beers. We do.
Yeah. Well, Matt, I don't think I can see any more questions. So look, I'm gonna call a close, I think.
Really?
Thank you very much for your words and the beer. It's been fascinating. Thank you, Ian, for your words again, also fascinating. And thank you to everyone who's in the audience who's come along. Hope it's been interesting and useful, and very happy to follow up should anybody want to. Thanks again, and goodbye.
Thank you, everybody.
Nice one. Cheers.
Bye.
Cheers.